Welcome back to Chess for Closers. I want to talk today about principled moves. If you've read any chess book, you quite probably have run into the phrase, the principled move. The principled move here is knight to e4 or something, or the principal move is to take on e6. And you probably figured out soon enough that they weren't talking about, the basic principles that we all learned in the first few weeks. Knights before bishops, don't get your queen out too early, maybe capture toward the center. That's a little more subtle one. Don't move a piece twice. The principles that they're talking about when they talk about the principal move is usually not something that basic, and so I thought we could look into some of these positions. The first position, I think this is probably the earliest a principled move can be made. That can't really be true, can it? Is the knight to d2 version, known as the Tarrasch variation of the French defense. The more common move, of course, as we all know, is knight to c3. And of course black can pin the knight, and that's a completely fine move, and it's a completely legitimate variation for both sides. But if white doesn't like his knight being pinned, he will probably play knight to d2. So there's a principled move here. Now sort of the obvious move is knight f6. And it's a fine move, but it's not a principled move. It gets a piece out, it prepares castling, it attacks the center square. So I guess it's sort of one of those general principles, get your pieces out kind of principle. But it doesn't, how to describe this? It doesn't notice the peculiarities of the knight to d2 move. The principled move here is c5. Okay, so what principle is this? I know no one goes back this far, and I certainly don't either. When Honus Wagner or Tris Speaker, one of those baseball players from the 20s, when whoever who made this quote, when he was asked, why is he such a good hitter? He responded by saying, "I hit him where they ain't." So I think this sort of applies in this position. Is where the action is, certainly in an open game, and there's no pawn chains here yet. White has, in a sense, neglected the center. He's cut off the connection of his queen on d1 to d4, and so c5 makes sense. C5 is attacking d4. It's not as well defended as it could have been. Let me just go back here, and different it would be. So let's look at this variation. Knight to c3. Well, c5 here is not the principled move. In fact, Magnus Carlsen would beat all of us after playing this move, but it's not a good move. And of course, the main point is d5 is going to be under-defended. Maybe black can avoid going down material here, but I'm not exactly sure how. At any rate, you just wouldn't play this move. Although people have played this against me on chess.com, but they didn't do it twice. Okay, so knight to d2, c5, and I guess the principle might be, if your opponent neglects the center, occupy it, and that's a principle. It's a good principle, and it may not be as, it may not come up as often as getting knights before bishops out. But anyway, sometimes you get bishops out before knights. So, okay, that's a principal move. And just for the record, the most common continuation here results in getting an isolated d-pawn. At some point, this exchange will happen, and black will have an isolated d-pawn. Well, if you've heard a general principle involving isolated queen pawns, Well, you haven't. There is no general principle saying avoid isolated queen's pawn. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was Tigran Petrosian who was world champion when I first started. That's how old I am. He used to play for position where he would have the isolated queen's pawn. Look, yeah, the pawn structure or the square in front of the isolated pawn can be weak. On the other hand, you got open lines, you got a pawn on the fourth rank and not on the third rank. That's another general principle, by the way, that you don't hear much. I guess you could, that's subsumed under the heading of space is a good thing. If you got a pawn on the fourth rank and your opponent has a pawn on the third rank in the center, you got more space. And other things being equal, that's a good thing. Let me show you a few other examples of what I would call principles. And I think some people might disagree. They won't disagree with this one. The Ponziani opening. Now this is a principal move in its own way. The principle that two center pawns side by side are strong. Well, that's what C3 is about. The problem is he won't succeed. But the principal move here for black takes advantage of this specific move. Ordinarily, the knight is ready to come out to C3, and so on D5, for instance, if white takes and black takes, well, knight to C3 is not available. And now look at let's look at remember the principle: don't get your queen out too early. But that's for a specific reason. For instance, is queen takes D5, was that a developing move? It absolutely was, and it took something to boot. Getting a piece out and capturing something is what you want to do. Now, it may not be worth it if you lose a whole tempo afterward, but black doesn't here. This is a great development for black. He's going to castle queenside. The D pawn might end up being very soft. Anyway, so the principal move here is D5. The other principal move, of course, because this knight also usually defends the E4 square, well, the principal move is also knight F6. And now it's harder to defend the E pawn. I'm pretty certain that D4 is the correct move here. And if black takes and white pushes and this is the main line for white, I think. I don't know Ponziani theory. But the point is that after C3, both D5 and knight F6 are principal moves here. How about this move? How about the King's Gambit? This is where people might disagree with me. I think there's a principled move here in the higher sense, maybe. Now we all know that white is not really threatening anything, because if he takes, he either gets mated or loses a rook after this check. And so black, apart from taking, has a really good way of declining by getting a piece out. You know, ordinarily you'd have to defend this pawn, play D6 or knight C6 or something. But because white's king is vulnerable, black can get away with this great move. But I don't say that's a principled move here. I think the principled move is D5, the Falkbeer counter gambit. This is the best move, and then this is the move that this sort of characterizes the Falkbeer counter gambit. It does a couple things, and one of them is very obvious. The knight doesn't get out to F3. The other thing, of course, is the bishop, the diagonal here makes castling difficult for white. But there's something else that this move does, and this is sort of the key to why I call D5 a principal move. Let's back up a little bit. In the King's Gambit, the role of the f-pawn is very important here. What is its role? When white plays the King's Gambit, what's the point? Well, the point is for that f-pawn to disappear, and for white to subsequently get a big pawn center with the d4 and the e4 pawns up there. White will get the bishop out, knight out to f3 castle, and mate on f7. This was the plan back in Morphy's day. I understand they play the King's Gambit in a more positional way now. I don't, but they do. Anyway, but the point of the f-pawn is to poof, disappear. And then you have your open f-file. I can tell you from personal experience, when I play the King's Gambit, I don't do it much anymore. If I go out to the bathroom or to get some water or something on the after my second move, and I come back and I still see the pawn on e5, I'm depressed. And I'm even more depressed when I see the pawn on d5. In fact, that's why I don't play the King's Gambit anymore. Anyway, but there's something about d5 I want to explain here, and that is the status of the f-pawn. The f-pawn here hasn't disappeared. It's taking up space. It's blocking the f-file. There won't be white castling and this rook that's going to be on f1 supporting some mate on f7. There's an f-pawn in the way. In fact, if white could make a move, if white could move backwards, he would beg black to allow him to play pawn from f4 back to f2. The pawn doesn't belong there. So I guess I would describe d5. The principal move is if you can make your opponent's last move illogical. I guess that's maybe too strong an explanation here. But anyway, my point is that in this position, the status of the f-pawn has changed for the worse. And so for that reason, I look at d5 as a principal move. This might give that, my thinking about this might give this away too. How about the Sicilian? I can't remember, there's a name for this variation. This is a principal move also. Again, two pawns adjacent in the center, very strong. But you don't let them stay there very often. And then I'm going to digress a little bit here. In the French, here, well, black can't really play b6, and he can, but at any rate, the pawn phalanx here of pawns on d4 and e4 have to be dealt with. You just can't let your opponent have two pawns up on the fourth rank in the center and let them stay there. It's just not done. And the reason is that you can't give him or her all the way into the middle game the option of playing d5 or e5, or in black's case, pushing the e5 pawn to e4 and attacking knight. You can't just leave it up to that guy to decide when to advance. You have to make him fish or cut bait, I guess is how the old folks used to talk about it. Yeah, b6 is a move. So let's go back to the Sicilian here. So e4, c5. Okay, so there's a move here for black that he would never play. This may be a good way to look at it. That he would never play against knight f3, but that is a good appearing, good developing move. So what move might that be? For instance, just for starters, black would never play this move because white would take and take back, and it's the center counter. But black can't play queen to a5, which is the standard move here because there's a pawn there. There's a similarity. The pawn on c5 is taking up space. Maybe the bishop would like to be on c5 attacking f2. Okay, so there's some similarities between my previous example. Well, guess what? This is my move. Oh, not here though. Against f4, d5. And so what's the principle again? I say it has everything to do with making this F pawn move look stupid. Maybe an exaggeration. If white takes, which is the best move, all of a sudden this F pawn isn't part of a E and F pawn duo, side by side, controlling all the spaces in the center. No, that F pawn's reason for existing is gone. Now, it's true that white can push, but then you'll see, black is going to play bishop F5, pawn to E6. He'll have no bad pieces. And by the way, he'll be the one with the 2 pawns up on the 4th rank, on his 4th rank. So I look at D5 here as the principal move. And as more of an argument for my point, black can make a gambit out of this. He doesn't have to take back with the queen. He can play knight F6 and knight C3, of course, and now E6. Now black is starting to take the pawn back, and he won't be down any material, and that pawn on F4 will still be there. So if white takes, black can take back, and black has a very good game. You'll notice that he dominates the D4 square, and the knight is coming to C6 very quickly, so white will not be able to get in D4. And black's got a lead in development. And again, white's king area is sort of aired out a little bit, but it's a legitimate gambit. I got another variation. I've been getting this a lot on chess.com, and so I think maybe we can talk about it. There's the King's Gambit, the C3. The C3 Sicilian is the same way. But look at this. I don't know what to call this opening. Maybe the French Caro-Kann, or the Caro French. I've been getting this a lot. C6. So is there a principal move here? I'm not sure, but there should be. And I guess I want to throw this out to the audience. White can play E5, and by the way, with this pawn structure, we all know that black is going to play for C5, and having played C6 and then playing C5, he will be down a whole tempo in any of these variations. So that's an argument that one could make. He could ignore it and just get pieces out. I wouldn't ordinarily think that this variation, if you can call it that, merits any time at all. I played someone at chess.com. I think we played 15 games in this variation, and so I have my opinions about what the best. I didn't win all of them, that's for certain. And I want to know what people think the principal move is here. I have my idea, and I'd like to hear what yours are. So much for principal moves. Check us out next time on Chess for Closers. See ya.